Greetings, friends. May the God of Lenten hope be with you all. Today marks the beginning of Holy Week. Can you believe it? I feel like it's a little too soon, but here we are. We mark that beginning of Holy Week with the story often called the Triumphal Entry, on the day we call Palm Sunday, though interestingly the text we've heard today doesn't mention palm leaves. Did you notice that? Anyway, this is a story of the meeting of many different elements in sort of like a whirlwind of movement. We've got a wandering preacher on a donkey. We've got a crowd pushed to the brink of understanding and following as if in a fever of excitement. We've got a city, a large city full of both civilians and soldiers, both the religious and the skeptical. And we have the expectation and the reality of a king. This is a story which the author of Matthew has taken pains to ensure is telling us something very important about Jesus. That though this might look like the man we're sometimes unsure about, and who the crowds and even his own disciples were often unsure about, this man entering Jerusalem is no less than the long-awaited king. And that means something. The crowd, it seems, were very convinced, or at least whipped along with the frenzy of others, and perhaps with the longing in themselves for it to be really happening. This is the story of Jesus finally entering Jerusalem, which he turned his face toward long before, which he knew would likely hold his death. This city was huge and full of people. It was packed with those who would travel to the holy city for the Passover. And thus it would have also been packed with Roman soldiers who were there to maintain order and to keep an eye on the Jewish people, who occasionally spread ripples through the land with talk of a long-awaited Messiah. Into this churn of ambitions, fears and hopes, into this bubbling cauldron of escalating tensions, rides Jesus, to the sounds of his people crying, "Hosanna," on a path lined with cloaks, their shawls, and the leaves that they've found on nearby trees. His entry wasn't a secret. It was shouted about. His entry was noticeable. He didn't try to hide. And though there are darker days to come, and the people who are so excited in our story today might be shouting very different things in a few days' time, and though in mere minutes Jesus will be drawing irreversible attention to himself by causing a scene in the temple, I want to linger here while we have a moment. Here is a person people had been wondering about, a person who had by all accounts done miraculous things, and by Matthew's account was riding into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, much in the way that the king prophesied about in Zechariah had done, which is where, by the way, if you notice, the whole 2 horses thing comes from. He's being a little bit too literal. Jesus is thronged by people who've heard of him, some who've seen him, probably some who have been restored to themselves in some way after meeting him. They are full up of the thrill of seeing him, being in his presence, that finally something's happening, the wonder at what he will do next. He's come to change things, surely. Imagine yourself there for a moment. Imagine the dust swirling into the air around you from people's feet. Imagine the noise of the crowd, the throng of people pressing against you as you're all clamoring to get closer. Imagine the thrill of seeing through people's shoulders a glimpse of this mysterious man riding on a donkey through this press of people. How do you feel there? Are you glad to see him? Do you recognize him? Here is the penultimate moment when people who had long held an expectation of something met the reality. They may not have known it yet, but for many, Jesus was bound to be a disappointment. But not because he wasn't their king. He was and is most definitely that, here to bring down the powerful and to lift up those who have long suffered. but to do this in a way that no one expected. He was here to be crowned king in death, in the humbling of himself. And the thing is, they did long for him. They weren't wrong about that. They grabbed whatever was around to make sure his donkey didn't have to touch the ground in a gesture of reverence and worship and love. They shouted out in excitement, but not just this. They shouted, Hosanna, which means help us. Because it wasn't just the excitement of seeing a king. It wasn't just the excitement of seeing a celebrity preacher. This meant something for their lives. Oh, Jesus, if you are the one, the Messiah, please help us. Bring your rule and reign to the here and now. Possibly something that you've prayed recently. It's likely they were longing for this man to, on arriving in Jerusalem, sweep the city clear of the oppressors, the Romans, in a blinding flash of might and power to set things to rights. And they would soon learn that this is not exactly the type of king that they had received. Jesus has a way of consistently challenging our expectations of him. Today we remember this triumphant entry and the triumphant, warlike king that the people didn't get to meet, when instead they were faced with a peaceable man who loved the poor, ate with sinners, and gave himself easily over to arrest and torture for the sake of others. Today is not unique. Every time we gather, we sing of and learn about and talk to this unking-like king. Every day we are to invite ourselves to a time of reckoning with the God we think that we know, as compared to the God that we actually know. And today is also not just about remembering a story. Today we once again witness the shocking revelation of a God who is never what we think. We remember, and as we do, we witness as parallel truths line up for a moment. And this man in a dusty cloak, hailed as a hero, is shown to be the one for whom the world has held its breath. Hosanna. Come, Lord. Hosanna. In a moment, if possible, I would love you to wander outside, weather permitting, of course, and lay the leaves that you've gathered reverentially and joyfully in your driveway, as if you're welcoming the King. Perhaps you'd like to decorate them in other ways too. Or maybe you've decided to decorate the inside of your house somewhere, or draw some pictures to welcome Jesus. As you do any of this, pray Hosanna, because Jesus is the King that means something. As you pray Hosanna, as you do this, as you welcome Jesus, remember the God that we are welcoming, even now, is the God who comes as a king even to ones such as us, even to our scattered state, even now. Are we ready for the King? Are we ready for this King? Amen.